there is one thing that is like etched in my mind. It's like having a tombstone that's etched. I mean, this is just seared. He said to me these words, and I can hear it to this day. He said, "You have made a terrible mistake. But you are not a mistake." Think about those words. You have made a terrible mistake, but you are not a mistake. He proceeded to say, the choices that you make tonight, tomorrow, and in the future will define your life forever and the legacy you leave to your 2 children. Make those choices wisely.
Mr. Gallagher, it's time.
Let's do it. Every choice has a consequence. On October 2nd, 1995, I took 23 steps. That's the distance it took me to walk to here and back. As I took those steps, I thought about my wife. I thought about my 2 children, Rob and Alex. I thought about my career. I thought about the home that I lived in. I thought about everything that defined who I was. As I took those 23 steps, I was Chuck Gallagher. I was a somebody in the community that I lived in. On the 23rd step, I reached out my hand, opened the door, and stepped into federal prison. I became 11-6-42-058. What most of you in this room would define as a nobody. Every choice has a consequence. I tell you, it's fun to travel around and do some of the things that I get a chance to do. The orange jumpsuits is a bit of a blast. But the reality of it is that it's really aggravating when you go through airport security. Now, the orange jumpsuit is not the problem. It's the 2 sets of handcuffs and the carry-on bags. You all know you cannot have more than 3.5 ounces of liquid on an airplane, but I get to carry 2 sets of handcuffs. I could handcuff the flight attendants to the drink cart. I mean, I don't think about that often, but you know. When you put it on the conveyor belt and TSA gets it, you know TSA, and it goes, and there it is, and somebody's looking at the screens, and they say, "I need a supervisor." And the supervisor comes over. "Is it okay to have handcuffs?" And then they flip in the book, and it is. And you ask yourself the question, really, and then they look at me and they say, "Are you law enforcement?" To which I really want to say yes. I really do, but that's impersonating an officer, which is subject to 5 years in prison and a $5,000 fine, and I've already tried that crime once, and it's not worth it, okay? It doesn't work. So I just look at them straight-faced and say, "No, I'm a pervert." And they look back and think, that makes sense. Okay, so one of the things that we're going to talk about is what I refer to as the unethical continuum. Because most people who are going to be sitting here today will think to themselves, you know, I really appreciate the fact that I have to sit through this, but I would never do anything unethical. I mean, not me. So let's talk about the slippery slope that takes place. Let's get real with each other. So here's the unethical continuum. And I'm going to use some examples so that we can kind of think about the practical side of this. Now, in fact, I'm going to do this. I'm going to ask you to raise your hand. How many of you know someone, not yourself, someone who has done something in their life that's unethical? Raise your hand. Okay. Now, most of you raised your hand. Some of you kept it down thinking, okay, this is a trick. He's going to do something. But let's think about the unethical continuum. And some of the things that we're going to talk about are actually, by most people's standards, okay. Let's talk about the first one. This is something that may not be good for the customer. But you know, it might be okay. I'll give you a perfect example. My mother, who is 75, and stepfather were going to buy a new television. So we went to a big box store, not to be named, to talk with someone about buying the television, and they wanted to take me, Mr. Tech, with them to help them in this process. Now, here's the reality of what took place. The salesperson came up, began asking the simple question, "What are you looking for?" To which they said, "A high-definition TV." Now, here's what actually took place. The salesperson looked at my mother, stepfather, and said, "Well, this TV has the best picture." And they started throwing out a lot of technical terms and said, "This TV is set to be connected to anything that you would ever want. This is the state of the art. This will meet all of your needs." To which my 82-year-old stepfather said, "I think that's what we need right there." And my mother is sitting there and she looks up at me and I'm listening to this guy and I'm looking at all of the parts that are associated with this, and it's like, is this really necessary? So I began asking a series of questions. Like, well, what if we look at this TV over here? I mean, a picture looks the same. The style looks the same. What's the difference? To which then he said, "Well, you know, if you're into gaming, that's not going to work for you." My mother responds, "We don't play too many games. They're up in the cabinet now." There was a major disconnect here. And then he said, "Well, you can't get Hulu unless you buy something," you know, and my stepfather says, "Hulu?" I mean, he's thinking a hula hoop. It's not connecting. So what was happening was, which by the way, if you look, it's generally accepted in the workplace, is I'm going to sell them what I want to sell them, which by the way was twice the price of what they needed, because I could. Now, the question may be, and I'm not here to make a judgment, but the question may be, well, but that wasn't good for the customer, but it was good for the seller. Well, okay, but you know, if they don't ask the questions, it's not my responsibility to make sure that they get what they really need. I might sell them what they want, or I want. Now, the other thing would be, well, it's not good for the company. This is part of that slippery slope. Okay, so let's make this real simple. I'm a member of the PTA, and the PTA is having a program, and they really want to promote this program. Okay, no big deal. So I go to work and I sit there and I think, you know, gosh, I've got to get some flyers out. So I sit at my work computer and I create the flyer. I mean, you know, you can't work 8 hours a day. I mean, really, you know, you got to have a little time, a little mental break. So I create the flyer on the computer at work. And of course, because we've got that brand new laser printer that, I mean, that's the deal. I can put color in this thing because, of course, why would I want to print this out at home on an inkjet printer that takes forever with very expensive color cartridges? So I make my Word document and I put the color things on there and I do what it needs to be done and I hit print. And it goes to the printer, and sure enough, there's 250 pages that I take out, and it's like, you know, but it's 250 pages. I mean, you know, like really big deal. And after all, everybody does this. Now that's not good for the company. We'd all agree you just took from the company, but everybody does it. So that's probably okay. In fact, it's fascinating because I get a chance to see a lot of ethics and compliance policies
And some of them now even say de minimis use of your personal computer or office supplies is okay. It's really quite amazing. Why? Because they know everybody does it, so to say anything otherwise just makes everybody bad or wrong. So it's part of the slope. Now the third thing I could do is it's a policy violation. Let me think, policy violation. Policy violation may be that for my expenses, there are certain things that I have to do. I have to document on the expense what's supposed to take place. I've got to turn it in on the expense report, and I need to turn it in order to be reimbursed. That's what our policy is. Okay, so it's February the 16th. That's a Saturday this year. And I want to take my wife out to dinner. So on the 16th, now if I did it on the 14th, it would be suspect. So, but on the 16th, okay. So we go out to dinner, and I'm thinking to myself, you know, I wasn't planning on this being quite this expensive. I mean, this little trip to Ruth's Chris turned out to be a bit more expensive than old Chuck had in mind. So I take the receipt, and I conveniently lose the one that has all the details about what the food and drink happened to have been. I just keep the one that has the place for the tip, and I put the tip on there, and then I write down the names of 2 clients that, of course, I was responsible for taking out to dinner. Now that's a violation of policy, but then again, see, who's going to know? I mean, you know, does that company realize how hard that I put in, what the hours that I put in for them, the time and the effort and the energy, and the times that I have probably forgotten to turn in expenses when I had charged it on my own card? I mean, after all, really, who's going to know? Well, unfortunately, all 3 of those kind of are norms in the workplace. Now, we can go a little deeper. The next one would be it's just plain old unethical. Now, if I ask you in the room, is it ethical to share company information outside of the company? You would all agree that's unethical. That's not supposed to be done. You would all agree that harassment in the workplace is unethical. There are many things you would agree are unethical, yet at some point we sit down on our social media or wherever it happens to be and we begin sharing or disseminating information. I mean, it might be very easy to go to Facebook or to Twitter or to get very frustrated at a particular point in time and actually share some information that really should never be publicly shared. Well, that's unethical. It's unethical to go up to someone who's a coworker and inappropriately touch them. It's unethical, perhaps, to start sharing crazy kinds of jokes that really have no value in the workplace, but start passing them around in a massive email chain. We could agree that's unethical. And here's the challenge. As you start the slope, you get to the center section where it becomes illegal. But it's all just a slope. I mean, after all, we start with, well, it's not good for the customer, but it's good for me. 2, it's not good for the company, but I mean, who really is going to know? And well, this is a policy violation, but I mean, after all, everybody does it. Down to then that next level of, well, it's just now become pretty much an unethical experience. And here's the key. The key is, as you go down that slippery slope, it becomes very easy to slide into what is unethical can become quite illegal. And illegal earns you that dubious distinction of orange jumpsuit and handcuffs.